Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you my September wrap-up. So in the month of September I read 17 books, which was quite a lot, and I'm really happy with that amount. It's like what I used to read before quarantine started, and I'm here to talk to you about all 17 of those books. But let's get started with the ones that you voted for me to read. I asked BookTube to choose what I read, and I read 5 of the books that you voted for. Not the top 5, but 5 of them. So the first one I want to talk about is The Martian by Andy Weir. And this is a book about a man who gets stranded on the moon and is left there, and he kind of wants to survive this ordeal. I loved this book and I rated it 5 stars. It's a new favourite for me. So I read this in a day and I absolutely adored it. I do have to say that there's quite a lot of scientific jargon in this one and scientific language. So if that's not quite up your alley, I'm not sure this book would be for you. But as a literature student who knows nothing about science, I was able to adore it and still enjoy those moments. I think it did a very good job of switching perspectives, because while we do get his perspective, we also get it from NASA and some of the other people on Earth, and it was just so interesting seeing all of their perspectives come together and interact throughout this story. I also just thought that Mark Watney was a wonderful character to read about. He was so funny, he was humorous, but he was still really human. Clearly he's a genius. Like, the more you read this, the more you realise he's so smart, but he's still got that sense of humour, he still makes very human mistakes, and he still has his moments where he feels a lot of stress. I thought it did a very good job with the suspense. Oh my days, sometimes the suspense had me at the end of my seat. If I didn't read this in a day because it was the last day of September, I still think I would have, just because I had to know how it ended. The ending was perfect. I was so happy with the ending, but I would also say that at the end there it tried to spoon feed me a moral message to the story, but at that point I didn't even care because I was so in love with this book. I don't think I'm translating it well, but I'm very much in love with this book. I'm looking forward to watching the adaptation, and I think this is one that I'm going to reread, but reread a bit slower next time. But still, I really loved this and I had a lot of fun with it. So good. Then the next book you voted for me to read was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, and I hated this. So this is a book about these 2 publishing firms which are both failing, so they decide to come together and merge as one publishing firm, but that means it's got 2 leaders, and both of those leaders have 2 assistants, and they're polar opposites in personality and type of publishing house. So it makes a bit of sense that these 2 assistants who have to work together hate each other and don't get along. And then a promotion is up for grabs and both of them are going for it. So this is a new adult romance, and there are so many reasons why I didn't like this book. First of all, the main reason had to be the writing. If I was judging this book based on the first 3 or 4 pages, I would have DNF'd it because it was so juvenile. The way that the hate was spread between them, I just didn't believe it. I feel like it was a childish kind of hate. And then we move on to the descriptions. I think that the descriptions in this book were incredibly insensitive. At one point at the very beginning, again within those first 3 pages, the main character is talking about ugly, and she describes ugly as someone with a hunched back, with a cleft plate, and also just something else, and I was just like, those are things that people actually are. That's a horrible way to define ugly. And then it talks about, like, oh, there's a suicidal tree, and this shade of lipstick was slit wrist red, and I was just like, those are such insensitive descriptors. You can use something else. There's so many adjectives in the world. So that frustrated me. I wasn't a huge fan of the writing. And then we have to talk about the romance. This is a book that's full of romantic tropes. Nothing wrong with a book being full of tropes, but the tropes that you're going to get in this one are enemies to lovers, you've got a bit of the sick fic trope, you've got a bit of the one bed trope. So there's lots of romance tropes, and if you're a fan of the romance genre, you might like seeing those. However, I do think that the enemies to lovers trope was done so badly here. I feel like with a good enemies to lovers, there's enemies, then there's friends, while you unpack all of your enemy angst and stress and situation, and then you move on to lovers. But they just flip switched between enemies to lovers very quickly, but so abruptly that it didn't convince me of the love. And even before it was love and it was just like, I don't know, lust, it just, the switch happened so quick. I was like, what? You were insulting each other and now you're kissing each other? When did this happen? There's also a lot of jokes to do with her height in this one, and in the beginning I wasn't minding it, but by the end, when everything was annoying me, that really annoyed me. I do think Josh's character brings some good things to light. We have moments where we see stereotypes around men and masculinity being unpacked, and there's some moments where this book does some really good things, and then some moments where it just doesn't do good things, and it was just not my type of book. I wouldn't really recommend this romance. After that, you voted for me to read The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon, and I buddy read this one with Kathy from In My Pages Books. It was nice buddy reading with Kathy, also because we had polar opposite opinions after finishing this book, and it's always exciting when you read a book and then you can discuss it from different points of view. So The Curious Incident of the Nighttime is where we follow this main character who, it's never explicitly stated, but from reading it and from what people have said around the world, as it's a bestseller, is that he has autism, and he finds this dog that has been murdered during the nighttime, and he wants to investigate and see who killed this dog and why they killed this dog. So I hated this and the more I think about it, the more I hate it. So we're going to talk about the book first, and then we're going to talk about the author. So first of all, let's talk about the book. So when I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. It's kind of nice to see from this character's point of view, because as an autistic person, he thinks about things in a very different way. And it was interesting to see all of that, and the plot was happening, but the plot frames these characters who come across as parental figures in his life, so people who look after him to a large degree, and I feel like the book tries to frame these characters in a positive light. They do not deserve to be framed in a positive light. They are awful people. Now, I cannot tell you in which ways they are awful people because that's spoilers, but if you have read this book before and you want to know why I don't like the parental figures in this one, I can tell you in the comment section down below. But yeah, I think the parental figures in this book are absolutely awful. I wasn't very happy with the ending. I was not satisfied. I wanted either more or just more understanding. I felt like things fell into place, but there wasn't enough justification given for me to really truly believe that that had happened. And the thing about this book is that it's very, very character driven, and the fact that I had such red flags and major problems with a lot of the characters was a very big problem in me thinking about my outlook of this book. And then what added to my dislike was afterwards I wanted to do some research on what the autism rep was like, and I did my research and I found out that autistic reviewers of this book did not like this book, and I also found a very glaring problem, which is that the author says that this book is not autistic rep. The author never explicitly states in this book that what he has is autism, but this is a character who goes to a school which is called a special needs school, and he gets teased for being special needs, and he definitely thinks in a neurodiverse way. If you read the book, that's the impression that you get. And this is known around the world for being maybe one of the most famous, one of the most popular books of representing autism, and yet the author says, hey, it's not autism rep. I didn't mean to write it on autism, and I did no autism research when I wrote this book. And that was the thing that shocked me the most. Like, no research was done, no Own Voices reviewers liked it, and Mark Haddon himself is neurotypical. I just found it to be a bit of a glaring problem, and the fact that all of the marketing around this book is marketing it as autistic rep, it just doesn't make me feel comfortable. So combined with that, and combined with my opinions on some of the characters in this book, I did not enjoy this one overall. After that, I buddy read The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, and I buddy read this one with Isabella from Babella. She's a great channel and she's wonderful, and I really, really enjoyed this book. But maybe enjoyed is the wrong word. Maybe I should say I really, really appreciated this book. So this is a book that is set during the Trojan War, and in this one we follow Bracis as she experiences everything that she experiences in the Trojan War. And while I was reading this one, I could not help thinking of the Song of Achilles and how differently both of these books portray the Trojan War. So in this one, we're seeing about the women and the girls who have suffered because they are captured and they are essentially made into slaves. Throughout this whole ordeal, they see the war, they experience some of the downsides of the war. I feel like downsides is putting it very lightly, and they suffer and they suffer and they suffer, and the suffering just just extends throughout the whole course of this book. There are a lot of content warnings for this, and if you're new here, I include as many content warnings as I can think of for each of the books that I read in the description box down below, so make sure you check those out. This book broke my heart not once, not twice, but several times over the course of me reading it. I felt for all of these women, I felt for their pain. I found it interesting how the author made so many comparisons between Bracis as a character, but also Bracis alongside some other female women who also had big parts to play during the Trojan War. It was a very different portrayal of Achilles and Patroclus than I usually see, and it was very complex. There were so many questions about how you feel as a slave towards your captor and a slave towards your captor in a time of war. The descriptions were absolutely amazing. Like, the writing was amazing. I could really get the atmosphere and the setting of being in a war camp. Whew. The last few pages gave me chills. I don't really know how to say this, but this book was absolutely fantastic. It's very hard-hitting, it's very saddening, but it's well worth your time. I also think that one thing worth mentioning is that even though it's about the silence of the girls, there are a few chapters that are from male perspective. Those chapters were my least favourite. I talked about this a bit with Isabella, and we were trying to decide, is there any other way that the author could have gotten around including a male perspective, because I would have loved if this was truly just the female perspective book. And I've also talked about it with a few other people on Instagram when I posted my mini review, and some people say maybe she could have gone into other female perspectives, or there were other ways to do it, and some people say like it was kind of necessary. I think that's up to you to make up your own mind, and I do think the male perspective did add some valuable discussion to the table, but personally they weren't my favourite chapters, and I'd rather there was some other way of including them. But all in all, I really liked this one, and it surprised me because I wasn't sure I was going to. I read Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This one is a modern classic. I'm struggling to think of how to describe this book, but the back is helping me out because it says that it follows Janie Crawford, who is fiercely independent and she's evolving her selfhood, and it's also a southern love story, it says. So this book is written in the way that the character speaks, which means that it's written in Southern American, and also, as well as it being written in Southern America, it's like Southerner patois. So it was really hard going. I did start reading this book physically, and I could have done it, but it was just taking so much effort that I decided to switch to audiobook. And I want to say thank you to Mocha Girls Read on Twitter because they sent me the audiobook, so I was able to switch over. And then I think I read this one in a day after I started reading physically, and then I switched to audiobook. I just listened the whole day because I was absolutely captivated. The writing in this one is truly beautiful. There's some lovely descriptions of nature that reflect the journey and self-discovery, and I would definitely say it's one of self-discovery. She really experiences what love is like and what love is not, what marriage is like and what marriage is not. We've got a lot here about the Black experience, especially as this one is set during history. So while she is not of the generation that was enslaved, her grandmother who is raising her was enslaved, and you get to see that generational separation between what the grandmother wants for her and what she wants for herself, and how this affects her and what leads her on in her life. I felt like the ending was quite unexpected and jarring, but at the same time it was still emotional. It was such an emotional build up from where we are at the beginning of the story to where we are at the end, and how some things come full circle. After that I read With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I buddy read this one via audiobook with Soleil from The Little Reader's Corner. And this is a young adult contemporary book where we follow our main character, who is a teenage mum. Although Elizabeth Acevedo often writes novels in verse, this is a prose novel, so a normal format novel, and it was really good. I really did enjoy this one. I thought it was such a good way of having a teenage mom in a book, because while I was expecting it to be focused on just her being a teenage mother and what's it like handling her child, so there'd be a lot more scenes with her child in them, it was about her, like as a teenager, and a coming of age story essentially, as you often see. It's about her trying to balance being a mother, being a good mother at that, her relationship with the father, falling in love, finishing school, what comes afterwards, money situations, and I thought it did all of those things really well. I was really interested in the family dynamic. We've got a complex family dynamic here, and Elizabeth Acevedo always unpacks it, unravels it, and explores the different aspects. We've got a lot about culture. While our main character is Black, She's also Latinx. She thinks a lot about the fact that she's American, but she's also got her Latin roots, and then she's also black, and all of this combines to make her who she is and what this means. She's got a huge love for cooking and the culinary arts, and I loved every moment that food was mentioned or talked about, or she mentioned how much her passion helps her to stay grounded and happy. I also thought it was very interesting how the romantic situation was handled and how being a teenage mum has influenced how she approaches romantic relationships. Elizabeth Acevedo just does a very good job of touching on a lot of different themes and a lot of subjects and not brushing over them so they don't have enough time, but also not giving them too much time that they overshadow the story. But I do have to mention that 3 times I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding was mentioned in this book. Okay, I just noticed it because it stood out a little bit, but I did really enjoy that book. After that, I read Slay by Brittney Morris, and I read this one for my dissertation. I've got some thoughts on this book because I was reading this at the same time that my older sister was reading it, so naturally we were discussing it. And if you want to know how we were finding it, my older sister DNF'd this book halfway through. So this one, we follow a black protagonist. It's set in America, and this protagonist makes this game which is called Slay, and it's a safe space for black people. You can only access the game if you are black, and it's just a game where you can play a character. There are fun battles that you can do. You can build up your own world and your own little house and everything, but tragedy strikes when one of the players is murdered for playing Slay, and as the creator of this game, our protagonist feels very responsible and doesn't know what to do about this game. As her game is thrust into the spotlight, there's a lot of questions and things that she has to face. I don't know where to start with my opinions on this one. I really didn't like it for the majority of the book, but I have to say that the second half did redeem it a bit. I'm just gonna break it into stages. So in the beginning of me reading this book, I really struggled because it was hitting me over the head with the black experience. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think this could be a good book for readers who don't know that much about the black experience or what it's like to be black, because it does give you a lot of information. It's very informative, it's very descriptive of what it means to be black and some of the struggles that black people experience, and especially some of the microaggressions that teenagers and other black folk from the diaspora face today. I do think all of that was handled really well, except for the fact that it was all these characters ever talked about. Now, as a black person, yes, the black experience of being black does affect almost every area of my life, but it doesn't mean that's all I talk about every single second of the day. I do have experiences that are outside of my blackness as well. I do have experiences that are just not focused solely on me being black. There were just some characters that were reduced to only talking about blackness in technical terms and in abstract and concept-like terms, when realistically we're not like that. We also chill. We have our chill moments too. I also feel like the plot took a long time to get started. For a book that tells you on the back that a murder is going to happen, it doesn't happen until halfway through the book, which meant for the first half of the book I was just waiting for something to happen that wasn't quite happening, and therefore it felt slow-paced. The worst thing about this book had to be the writing. Chapter openers that start with "my name is" and then a person, and then goes into like an entirely different way of writing, but they just wanted to start the chapter with "my name is." Yeah, that didn't work for me. I felt like the writing could have been tightened up and improved quite a lot. I also think this is the biggest problem I have with this book. The fact that you have to be black to play the game and how people decide that you're black enough to play the game, it opens a can of worms to colorism. And it does not unpack that. At one point in this book does the main character kind of acknowledge that the colorism issue is there, but they acknowledge it kind of on a one-to-one basis, as in her with one other person, and therefore it's not unpacked as a larger problem of the game. It's not discussed, and I think that aspect of the colorism that element of the game embraces, that really needed to be unpacked and discussed a lot more for me to be satisfied. Talk about some good things. The good things was the game was really cool. I really liked Slay. I thought it was creative. I thought like it was something exciting. It would be fun to play. I also think the end did a very good job of wrapping up quite a lot of the themes that it dealt with very nicely. The end made me feel happy. The end made me feel hopeful, and there was a love interest in this one, and I thought that the love interest storyline was not going where I wanted it to go, and I was really angry and really upset about that. but just be patient. In the end, it is going to come to the forefront and it is going to get tackled and discussed and handled and unpacked. So the ending did redeem that part of angriness for me. I think it also did a very good job of talking about black elitism, which is a problem within the black community and one that I don't see addressed much in young adult, and I thought it was a very good job of policing black stereotypes of black elitism, and that it did all of that very well. So on one hand, this book does do some things well, and I think it's going to be a valuable read for some people, but for me personally, it fell short. I wasn't enjoying it that much, and it ended up just being an okay read. That said, if you can see all of the tabs here, it gave me a lot of content for me to discuss in my dissertation. I don't even know how I'm going to talk about the next book. So the next book that I read is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It's a new favourite. It might be the best book that I've read this year. It might be in a tie with Kindred. I really can't decide. But this book, it blew my mind. So I buddy read this one with Cara from Wild Book Garden, and this one is translated fiction that follows this small town called Beartown, and in Beartown they are huge fans of ice hockey, and the ice hockey culture is very intense, maybe to a toxic degree. I don't think I'm going to say much more, but there is a huge content warning for this one. It's a big theme of the book. I'm going to put it down below if you want to know ahead of time, but it is a big major part to the story. I don't know what to say. This book was written so well. Beartown was so very well written. It switches perspective a lot, but the switches were done seamlessly. Every single character was incredibly fleshed out. Some characters you're rooting for, some characters you despise, and some characters are definitely that grey area in the middle and you don't know what to make of them. But all of these characters are so unbelievably human, and you see their motivations, you can see why they make the choices that they make. They could have come out of this book and I totally would have believed every single one of them truly belonged in this world. We are in a small town setting in Beartown, and the small town vibes, they are so high in this book. It does a very good job of making this setting weave into the storyline, of making this setting believable and realistic, and it also made me very interested in ice hockey. That was one of my biggest nerves reading this book. I don't know anything about ice hockey. I don't know the rules, the situation. I just didn't know anything, but it made me instantly interested in the ice hockey, explained why it was relevant to this town, and it made me feel loads of things. The emotions that I felt while reading this book was hope, was sadness, was anger, was pain, was disappointment, was every single shade of emotion that there possibly is. I was feeling things after reading this book, and it gave me quite a bit of a book hangover. I was feeling things and thinking about this book long after I finished it. I immediately pushed it on my younger sister, who read it as well. I'm currently pushing it on my mother. I'm going to push this on everyone. Everyone should read this book if they are able to handle the content warnings. I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. I feel like I'm not doing a very good job of articulating how wonderful it is, but I don't want to give anything away. I just feel like it was such an emotional journey, and it made me surprised. I love when a book can make me feel surprised. It did a very good job of giving small reveals along the way, and also for making me love characters at the end that I didn't expect to love at the beginning, and hate characters at the end that I didn't expect to hate at the beginning. Who's ready for a rant? After 2 brilliant books, we're gonna talk about 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. So I borrowed this one from my sister, and I read this for a video idea called A Book Battle, and I'll leave a link to the book battle video up above and down below. So this book follows Anna, and Anna does an interview with this billionaire called Christian Grey, and she gets enamored with him instantly, and he has a very dark secret which has to do with explicit sex. This book was so awful. It's my second 1-star rating of the year, and I only usually give out 0 to 1 1-star ratings a year. So the fact that I have a second one this year does not make me happy. But it was awful in every term, definition, and angle of the word awful. First of all, the writing is atrocious. Like, I know that I've said in this video that the writing in The Hating Game was bad and the writing game in Slay was bad, but that writing sounds angelic compared to this. This is truly, you can't get worse than this writing. You literally can't. But as well as that, we've also got characters that are horrible. The relationship in this one is definitely abusive, it's definitely toxic, and it's presenting it as a very, not healthy, but it's presenting it as a, you know, normal relationship. It's not. It's toxic, it's controlling, it's abusive, it's stalkery, it's awful. This is not romance. There's also no consistency. They say things like Anna never cries, and then Anna spends the whole book crying. Christian Grey never has normal sex, and then they spend the whole book doing just that. Like, it doesn't make sense. Also, things don't make practical sense. Don't even get me started on the BDSM representation in this. This is terrible BDSM representation. This whole contract thing that they have going on, that is not consent. Consent is not something that you can sign away everything at the beginning and then do whatever you want to a person and then like it's okay they signed this contract. No, no, no. Consent happens all the way through the sexual encounter and there's check-ins and stuff like that. It's not the way that this book is presenting, and BDSM does not happen the way this book is presenting. It also has some, I don't know how to explain it because, you know, I'm not a BDSM queen. I'm sorry, I don't know everything about BDSM, but from what I've read in New Adult, this ain't it. From what I've read in fanfic in New Adult, this is not good BDSM rep. I don't think I have the energy to talk about all the things I didn't like because we could be here for a very, very long time. But I didn't like the characters, didn't like the plot. It was an abusive relationship presented as not abusive. There was BDSM rep that was really awful, and Anna's a horrible. She's like she's a rubbish character. So it was bad. The point where I was like, that's it, I just lose it, this is awful, is when he threw a tampon into the toilet. Like, you just don't do that, okay? You just don't do that. I guess now is a good time to mention that I also read Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. I read this partly for the book battle, but mostly for my read it backwards on Twilight, so I'm not going to mention it too much here. I've got a whole video where I talk about my thoughts and my feelings on this one. It's about a teenage girl who falls in love with a vampire, and it's about the beginning of their relationship. It's the first book in a series. Link to my Twilight read it backwards up above and down below. Needless to say, it's not a perfect book, but it's still my favourite one in the series, and I had a lot of fun ripping it apart, but also reading it. Now we're back to a book I loved again, and that is Artemis, Fowl and the Time Paradox by Eoin Colfer. I buddy read this one with Gaia from Gaia Athena, and this is a new favourite. I loved this book. I rated it 5 stars, and it was truly brilliant. Like, this is the longest one in the series, but I think that makes the most sense because it's called Artemis, Fowl and the Time Paradox, which means it deals with time travel. Let me tell you about the first book again, as I do every month in these wrap-ups. So in the first book we follow Artemis Fowl. He's a child who discovers that there is magic in the world and there's fairies in the world, and if you capture a fairy they have to give you this fairy ransom gold to get the fairy back because they want to maintain the fairy secret. Artemis Fowl is a mastermind criminal and he decides that he wants to get this gold, so he needs to kidnap a fairy. However, the fairies might be a bigger enemy than he can contend with because fairies have magic on their side too. Oh my gosh, this book was wonderful. How am I going to talk about it? So I can't tell you too much because I don't want to give you any spoilers for the series, but all I'm going to say is that it does a very good job of, again, building up on the world building and adding more layers to the story, and every single bit of information that this book will give you and slide in casually into the story will come back around and be of worth later on. So there's a full circle in everything mattering, everything having relevance and importance. In this one, because of how the plot is done, you can really see Artemis's character development in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different shades. I can't go into too much detail, but I'm a softie for very good character development, and the way this book presents Artemis really showed me how much he has developed and come a long way, and how much I loved seeing that. I also didn't expect so many characters from the past to come into this one, especially a certain someone, but I did like those characters being brought back into the story. We've also got the usual gang, but the way that the usual gang is included is a bit different from in the previous books, but it also just added all the fun and made it all the more fun because of the way that the characters were included. The plot was really unpredictable. There's not one plot twist, there's not 2 plot twists, there are multiple plot twists that I didn't see coming. Well, I was able to predict one of them. It didn't even matter because there were like 3 other ones to keep me entertained, so that was fantastic. And I think this is the best representation of time travel I have read yet. It was very complex and it was very nuanced, and yet everything was described perfectly, everything made perfect sense, and I was able to believe it entirely. And it was the way that I think time travel really should be done and is realistic and without any plot holes that I can personally think of. So I think it handled the time travel aspect incredibly well. I also think that it just made everything fall into place for this series in a very believable and a very interesting way. I was so happy with the last line of this book and at the end of this book. The only thing I didn't like in this book was hint of a ship that I do not ship, and I hope this ship doesn't come to light because I would have a lot of problems with that ship coming to light. But that said, everything else absolutely adored, couldn't give it anything less than 5 stars. Then I read The Shock of the Fool by Nathan Filer, and I buddy read this one with Samantha from Samantha's Books. This is one that we've both had on our TBR for a very long time, so it was kind of nice to get it off of our TBR. So I think the synopsis is going to do a very good job of describing this one because I don't really know how to describe it, but it says, I'm going to introduce you to my brother. His name is Simon, but in a couple of pages he's going to be dead and he was never the same after that. So I think that's a very good way to summarize this book. It's heavily focused on mental health and on grief and how those two entwine, and I'll leave some content warnings down below as I've said before in this video. So I thought this book was just okay. I kind of wanted to love it more than I truly did. I struggled to get into this one just because there's a lot of questions that you have and you don't really get answers until almost at the end. And all the way through up until that point I wasn't really feeling the story. I wanted to be more emotional connected than I could be, but the fact that the timeline in this one is jumbled, so you're going from the past to the future to the present to the past to the future to the present, and you're kind of jumping all over the place, it didn't really work for me. I know it did a good job of building the suspense in the story, but I just wasn't connected enough to care about that suspense and to care about the build-up that was coming. It's all about character, so it's not really a plot-based book, and I just wasn't connecting to him. It's very strange because grief is one of the things that I am most interested in when I'm reading a book, but this one just didn't really do it for me. I will say that the ending was good. The ending was very emotional. The ending brought all the threads of the story together really well, and it was just such a solid ending. But I have to admit, I probably would not have gotten to the ending if this wasn't a buddy read, and I'd be interested to see these themes done in a different way in a different book. So I can't really recommend this one, but it wasn't all bad. Also read Afrofuturism by Ytasha L. Womack, and this is another one for my dissertation. This is a non-fiction book. It's written in like a textbook kind of style, so it's not fiction, and it's just about Afrofuturism. It's discussing Afrofuturism across literature, music, films. Yeah, I think those are the key 3. It also goes into a few other things like video games and such, but it's just Afrofuturism as a whole. I absolutely adored this. I got so many good points from this. I think it does a good job of showing examples and showing what creators of who create Afrofuturism have to say and what they think, but also it goes into the concepts, what Afrofuturism means, why Afrofuturism, how Afrofuturism uses aliens or space or colonization and how it reflects that. I think it did a very good job. It talks about contemporary work as well as classic work, and I just really enjoyed it. Sometimes when it comes to textbook kind of non-fiction I can get bored, but with this one I never did. Last but not least, I read 4 Shakespeare plays because there were 4 Sundays in September, and I've been doing Shakespeare Sunday, which means I read a play every Sunday by Shakespeare. There's my trusty Shakespeare. The ring light makes it look a bit grandiose, but whatever. So the first 3 plays that I read were Henry VI Part 1, Henry VI Part 2 and Henry VI Part 3. I started with 1 and then I went 2 and 3, although in publication order it should go 2, 3 and then 1. My favourite one of these was Henry VI Part 1. Probably because it's one of Shakespeare's later plays, so I don't really think there's much of a synopsis I can give you for any of them, except they follow the rule of Henry VI in different places. Number 1 being when he's freshly crowned, and then in the middle of his reign, and then number 3 being towards the end of his reign. These plays, I just want to say, they're not historically accurate. It plays with things to make them work for the play, but I really enjoyed the first part. I thought it did a great job of showing how the king didn't have much power. It was all about the politicians vying for power and how they were talking over him and trying to manipulate this young, gullible, fresh king to do whatever they wanted. And I loved how few lines the king had, especially towards the beginning of the play, because it really wasn't about him. It was about all of the other characters surrounding him and doing different things. I fell in love with the character. I really loved Talbot. He was great. I loved him as a soldier. I loved him as patriotic fighter. I loved him as a father, and I also thought the writing in this one was absolutely beautiful. Shakespeare's writing is always beautiful to me, but it was especially well done, and even though I'm not a huge fan of the history plays, I am a fan of this one. But then part 2 and part 3 happened, and they didn't manage to capture me as much. I found them to be quite a bit more military focused, and just I didn't have a standout character that I felt pulled towards. It also felt like both of these ones were more of the same. It was more of the same political game scheming of the politicians kind of having a lot of impact and the king not having that much impact. But I have to say, in part 3, King Henry VI part 3, I really did enjoy Queen Margaret's character. She had more to do with everything happening than her husband did. She was not going to be the love interest in the story. She was going to be fighting for her kids, fighting for her country, and getting up and doing things because her husband was not doing enough to satisfy her. And I quite liked seeing that in a female character in one of the history plays. So I would say the first one is my favourite, then part 3, and part 2 was kind of meh. And then the last play that I read was Pericles by Shakespeare, and I really enjoyed it. It's such a random play, okay? So I don't know what type of play this is, but is it comedy? I don't know. But it's quite funny just because it follows our main protagonist and it just goes through his life, and he goes through a lot of misfortunes that are very misfortunate. They're very unfortunate. And he also goes through some like amazing, so convenient, happy moments where everything just falls into place for him. So he kind of navigates between disaster and then brilliance, and then disaster and brilliance. And it was just entertaining to see. It was like lightly humorous because you know it could never happen. The disasters were so disastrous and then the happy moments were so convenient, but it was still just entertaining to read it all. I liked our main character because he was just so sincere in all of his emotions. He really just wanted the best for everyone, and even though he was like a prince, he wasn't full of himself, and he cared about the people, and he cared about his wife, and he cared about his children, and he was just such a loving, sincere main character that I really enjoyed that. I thought the writing was amazing, especially when it came to Pericles himself. Everything that he said was just written in such a beautiful way, and we've got this character, I think his name is Gower, who is essentially the chorus, the narrator in this one. He narrates the opening of every act and he talks in rhyme, and it's entertaining for setting the scene, and I just thought the writing was lovely to read. It was a great story, a great character, and we've also got a secondary character who's incredibly loyal, and I always love seeing a loyal secondary character. So that's that for Shakespeare Sundays. Okay, this was a long video, but I did read 17 books, so I had a lot of things to say. Please let me know in the comment section down below. Have you read any of these books? Do you agree or disagree with what I said? And what was your favourite read in the month of September? Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior. Scientifical. You can tell I'm not a scientist.